Hi, I'm new at this, so we're going to be learning together. But my name's Tony. I am a developer. I've been working for 11 years in development, doing all kinds of various things. Right now, I'm working for VML, which is a big multi platform, they do agency type style development. So I've worked for multiple different projects and I've done multiple different code bases. I think full stack is a bit of a unicorn term, but you could say that I'm pretty close to a full stack developer. But one thing that I haven't done, that I'm hoping that you'll come along with me, is set up a system using AI tools. The whole system of work is changing. I've been doing this for 10 years, and PHP and JavaScript was my bailiwick. Drupal, CMS, AEM, other big systems that we've stood up from scratch. But now, with the introduction of AI, we're getting away from this baseline introduction into development and getting more hands off with how we develop, which is leading to some problems. People are getting into this with very little experience. People are entering into the market with no real background in code or how it works, and people are blowing up their AI budgets by not introducing guardrails and a proper framework. So for this vlog, I know vlog is an old term, but I'm old. So for the vlog, we're going to walk through generating some idea concepts with Gemini. I have a professional Gemini account. We're going to work with Claude to establish a framework and set up a project. And then once that project is established, we're going to connect out to AWS. We're going to set it up in probably an EKS or ECS Docker instance. I'm going to walk you through my entire process, and there's going to be times where things break. That is part of development. So part of why I'm calling this a vlog and not an instructional video is because I intend to break things. I'm going to show you what real development's like from beginning to end, what happens when things don't work. I'll try to keep it as entertaining as possible. Honestly, I'm a pretty social and outgoing kind of guy, but I've never really had a YouTube presence. I've never really made videos like this before. I've looked at making a Udemy video, but they're so structured and they take so much effort to maintain. So I'm just throwing this out there and seeing if I get any bites. That being said, I do have experience working with Claude. I have experience working with GitHub Copilot, where you're using these systems to architect existing code to make features and make things work more efficiently and effectively. I've got AWS certification training. I've gone through years and years of development, and I'm currently in technical leadership. But I thought this was a good time with the way the market is now and the way things are working to introduce myself to the wider world and see if anyone can glean anything from my expertise. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. We've got stuff to do. So, first, I like using Gemini as just a way to back and forth beat around thought processes and what we're going to do. And in my long, you can see all of my different chats with Gemini, I came up with this concept. Gemini's good for back and forth. Hey, I want to do something that's new and innovative. I want to use systems that I'm familiar with PHP. I want to try something new. And getting to a point where you're ready to start development with Gemini is sort of the point of Gemini, to be honest. It's can do development. Like if you get down, I'll go through the overview of the project I'm trying to build. But if you go down into this, it'll give you code snips. It'll try to do some development for you. But I found that using Claude or GitHub Copilot to do the development side and using this to get you technically architected properly is probably the better approach because of the way that Claude and Copilot have integrated themselves so thoroughly in the IDE. it's just a much more straightforward way to develop. But let's go back into the plan. So I went through back and forth what's buzzworthy, what's going to get me noticed, something that will make my portfolio stand out a little bit more. And after all of that, we came up with this concept called Street Bytes. Street Bytes, in my mind, and what I was trying to get through to Gemini, is a app. It's going to be a web app, because I don't like navigating through the iOS standard. I don't like making it all the way through the Google Play Store. It's just a pain point that I don't need for a portfolio. In a perfect world, I had this and I was going to productionalize it and make it available to a wider market. I'd probably also do this in iOS and have it in the Apple Store. But for our particular purposes, I'm going to build a web app. Also, I am not against using new development tools. I'm not against using Python or building this into some JavaScript, TypeScript kind of solution. I've done all of that, but my main strengths as a developer, because I'm old, are PHP. PHP has a Laravel framework that I've never really tooled with before. We have a Laravel project that my company owns, or that we have for a client, and I do maintenance in that system, but I've never stood anything up from the bottom to the top. I've never gone through the entire development lifecycle. So I'm going to take some time and introduce this in brief, what we're planning to do. And it's important to go through this step, because if you just fly at Claude and say, hey, I want to do this thing, it can do it for you, but without going through the proper conversation and saying, this is how I want to do it, this is how I'm going to secure it, these are the guardrails I'm going to put on it, this is how I want to document it, it's just going to give you whatever guess it feels it needs to do. Claude is really good at a lot of things, but at its heart, Claude is just a reference tool. It looks at existing code, it looks through the models to find something that already exists that it can roughly duplicate. And that's great, but it'll also take the path of least resistance. If you don't set it up and say, hey, this is how I want to develop this, these are the systems that I want to use, this is the structure and the security, this is the process we're going to take, it's just going to go crazy. It's going to fly out there and make something in 10 minutes and it'll look good, potentially. But usually the functionality is just not there, not what you expect. If you've been developing for years like me and you're using these tools, you'll find that it's good at executing, but it's not good at solving those technical problems that need to be solved in creating a new project, in setting security standards, in setting for PHP, it's PHP Stan and PHP CS, which are PHP coding standard languages. So anyway, back to the topic at hand. So Gemini is giving me some basic thoughts on how I would set up a Laravel system. And the prompts for these, we went through a lot of things. But after giving it some basic direction on my thoughts, I want to focus on a real-time operations dashboard, something a little buzz marketing, tracking food trucks, placing reservations. I mean, this could be something that we use in farmers markets. This is something that we could use if there's like a pop-up restaurant or something like that. But the thought is that we would build this app that somebody could have a food truck, park it out on a corner, and pin their GPS location and say, this is where I am. When that happens, it can then send API data, and this app will pick it up and say, okay, this truck is here. I need a place to not only, I need to authenticate for the truck, and I need to tie some code into the GPS geolocation for the truck. Then I need a place to store, hey, this truck is active and kept at this GPS location. I need to have a place for them to authenticate and provide context about their truck, pictures, maybe a rough menu of some kind. We're also thinking about having some queue. So if you're a user that uses this site that I'm building to get to the food truck, it could either track your geolocation and say, hey, you've arrived, and that'll add you to a queue. Or there could be some kind of promotional benefit. Like if you've gone there and you scan this QR code, then it says, hey, I'm here. And that'll add people to a queue. And when that queue builds, it'll associate one person with a set amount of time. So that's the basic concept. But to frame it, I'm thinking that we use Laravel, because Laravel is a PHP-driven thing. We're probably going to need to host this on AWS. I'm thinking we could do a Docker build, something like Lando. I like dev with Lando. That's just my personal preference. I've been doing it for Drupal for years. So we might stand up something in Lando, build it into Docker. Docker is a compartment-driven development, so you can basically have everything sandwiched into one Docker container. And when you're ready to deploy, all you would do is set that Docker container into the actual AWS instance. So we're thinking Laravel. We're thinking that we could use some, there's a lot of context here. Live queues, automatic geofencing alerts. So when they set their coordinates, we can say, hey, there's somebody available in your area. We can do simulating live movement. So a person who's really driving the market, influencer, if you will, could say that this person is in that truck's area or is at that truck. And that could promote some additional things. But because I'm a PHP dev at heart, not in function, but at heart, I'm a PHP dev. We're going to use Laravel, and Laravel also has Livewire. So Livewire is a front-end framework that uses this PHP to make it fully live and reactive. So the main upside of using a JavaScript, or like I use a Vue a lot, or React, is that you have this interface that doesn't require a page reload like PHP does. Well, Laravel Livewire does the same kind of thing. It tracks APIs, it Ajaxes context, it loads it on the fly using WebSockets. So it doesn't need a page reload every time you want to update what's showing on the screen. So basically, with this, we've established, okay, we need to get Google Maps connection for the actual map, and we need to enable someone to set pins, right? We need to have some Laravel forms so that a vendor could go in and say, okay, this is my truck, these are my bits and bobs, this is my picture, this is my brief menu. All that's still TBD. We're going to have event broadcaster, which pushes data across the network. So this is somebody's pinned in your area, push. Somebody's visiting this truck, push. That is very much the basics of this. And it's giving me here a code blueprint. I don't know how closely I would really want to follow this. If we're going to vibe code, I don't want to copy something over and make it work. I'm going to keep this for reference. And if you haven't done AI development before, so I came about this in a weird, like you can see here, career pivot guide. It's not really what we're using this for, but it has all the context. When you start a conversation, each of those conversations is kept in its own discussion context. So when I want to go back and continue this conversation that has all the pre-existing context, like what do you recommend to set this up, or do we need to do an Arc42? Arc42 is just an architecture diagram. 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So this is saying I'm giving you all of the answers is an Arc42. When we get into that level of planning, we can come back to this conversation, and this will give the context, but we don't want to give it too much. So where agents start having issues is when you overpopulate them with content. So if I have one discussion and I'm keeping everything in the scope of one discussion, eventually it gets to be to the point that, one, you're using more tokens because it's got all of this context and can't actually narrow to a result without scanning through the entire thing. And two, it starts to hallucinate. So hallucination in AI means it thinks that this answer is correct based on the context. Maybe there's too much context. Maybe you're jumping back and forth in context. Like here, I did pivot a little bit from my initial, hey, what would I do to pivot my career if I wanted to try something front end, or if I wanted to, okay. That was the initial impetus of this conversation, but we moved on from there. But when both of those are in the same discussion, you get to the point where it doesn't know which takes precedent over which, and overthinks the problem. And that overthinking of the problem and coming up with the solution, it can sound very confident. And that confidence is just baked into the AI. So the confidence is going to sound 100%, this is absolutely the way to do it. And it's often not. And that gap is where things start to hallucinate, where it might think something is absolutely guaranteed to be true when it's not. And that's why we need to create a structure around this and how we handle it in Claude and how we handle it in Gemini, where this is very separate from the rest of our chats, from the rest of our context. So there's just some AI thoughts, but why don't we go ahead and jump into Claude and see about setting up a framework. So Claude is my development chat of choice. I actually use this at my current project. I have used it personally. You can do this in a terminal. You can do this in a separate window. You can do all kinds of things. But my preferred IDE or development environment is VS Code, because I've used PHP Storm, I've used JetBrains, but VS Code is good when you need to pivot. So because we're doing a full stack development on this, and I might want to go back and forth from PHP, from maybe I'll need some JetBrains to dig into some Java or something. I don't intend on doing that. But if I need to go back and forth, then you'd have to have several different IDEs to handle each of those perfectly. VS Code, with the way that you can extend it, is pretty good at handling all those different bits. Also, we have this nice little chat window here. I'm going to move my guy over here. And the chat is automatically connected. So I had to give it permissions to do things like create new files, to connect out to Claude. And I am using a Claude Pro subscription, which is not terribly expensive. The tokens are pretty manageable. I'm not anticipating blowing out my token budget. If I do blow up my token budget, you can bet I won't be back for a little while. I might take a couple weeks to recalibrate my systems. Okay, so I am using VS Code. I'm planning on using this moving forward. The documentation is divine. Documentation will save your butt. So, along with this, I've got a Street Bytes, is what I'm calling it. I'm not intending on reselling it. If I was, I wouldn't be creating a video over it. But Street Bytes is what I'm going to call it. But along with Street Bytes, I'm going to create a new folder for asks and answers or architecture or something of that nature. I'm just going to call it docs and architecture. So I'm going to have a street bytes, which is where our feature is going to live, and I'm going to have a docs and architecture. Every step that I make with Claude, at some point when you're selling this to a client, they're going to want to know why. So as I'm working through with Claude and building this framework, I'm also going to be regularly updating a documentation piece that won't live in the repo, that I can keep in Markdown, and I can use that as a place for Claude to drive answers. If you keep summarized like why concept at all times, it makes it easier to address small iterative changes that you've made and why you made them. Documentation saves lives as a baseline. If you're not doing something to track what it did, what you did, and why those decisions were made, it will come back and bite you one day. Maybe not today. Maybe today you just have a cool thing you can look at on your profile and go, look, this thing works. But one day, if you want to make this marketable, you need some place that you're actively documenting, and more thorough than in the claude.md file or an agents.md file or a readme file. You need something to track the decision-making process. So I would highly recommend you do this as well. But back to Claude. So this is vanilla. I have not done anything. I haven't connected anything. We're just going to tell it our initial prompt and see what happens. Okay? So let's give it some context. There's a plan mode. Plan mode will get you, hey, here's the architecture, here's the structure, how are we going to build this thing? So I'm going to go to plan mode, and Copilot has something very similar to this again. So let's just tell it what we're going to do. I'm looking to set up a new project for my portfolio. I want this system to be built in Laravel and to set up a Laravel local development process using Lando as our local development system. I need to create a starting point to prompts are, it's like talking. Sometimes you wish you had more time to phrase what you're going to say in your head before you say it, and I'm sure my video is going to reflect that. But if you're going through something like Claude, and Claude's sophisticated, you want to give it as much context as you can from the start. So I need to create a starting point to begin local development for a start. And this is why we went through planning. I want this to be a Laravel development, Laravel feature application. I want to use Laravel Livewire to make this system as efficient and user effective as possible. I want to create a there's a lot of different thoughts on this. Anything front end, you need back end architecture. I've been a PHP dev using MySQL pretty much my entire career. Most of this is going to be driven by REST API and is not going to require some data to be stored, but when it comes to a user entering from a form and creating information to stay in this application, we need somewhere to store it. I could see using MongoDB or some kind of database-driven structure for this. It's very, very speedy, but we're talking about potentially growth at scale, and we want somebody to be able to search a food truck or say, I want Chinese food or I want Italian food. And when it comes to that, Mongo is not as effective because Mongo is really, really good at storing a whole bunch of information based on one criteria. Usually it would be a primary key of some kind. Maybe the name of the truck would be the primary key. But it's not very good at filtering based on data points, because anytime that you, and this is probably getting too far in the weeds, but anytime that you are looking at a document and you're saying, I'm going to filter by this specific data point in this long running doc, it loses efficiency when it has to load the entire document and search through the document to get to the data point that we're trying to filter by. And because of that, I'm not going to go with a MongoDB instance. I'm not going to do a document-based. I'm going to do SQL-based because that's where my bread and butter's been for 10 years. So we're going to do that. I want to create a MySQL setup for this. Maria, maybe. I want this to be a Laravel application. I want to use Laravel Livewire to make the system as efficient and end user effective as possible. I want to create a MySQL setup. And let's see what else we had. So we don't need to go into all of this. Like I said, context is king. We want to give it a, so maybe we'll put in the Laravel reverb. Is the WebSocket server, runs on PHP, probably required for local development. I intend to use Laravel reverb to connect to WebSockets. So maybe MariaDB. Okay. Please help me set up a Lando local development instance that addresses all of these issues. All right. So now's the moment of truth. And if you're really good at this, if you're doing it a lot, you could just talk. This record seems silly, right? I'm talking to the video. I'm also could be talking to Claude at the same time. It seems a little bit redundant, but because of the way that Claude is built, it can take your recording and then decipher your ums and uhs and I don't knows into something that it can leverage. So it does save time, especially if you're multitasking. And you can use agents stacked on top of agents, and you can use nesting it. We're just introducing this, and then we will get into some of that complexity later. So let's go. Plan. So because we're in plan mode, it's going to iterate through all of my requirements and ask me any outstanding questions. So it's looking at the directory. There's nothing there. You can see how many tokens it's using. So if you want to see, if you haven't done this before and you want to see why and how it's working, you can get into these where it's thinking and read into the logic. So it's Lando, so it needs a Laravel app server with the MariaDB service, Node.js for front end, that's fine. Redis for caches, which is good for Reverb, MailPit for mail testing, and Composer, Atlassian, NPM, which are standard. If you're not using NPM and Composer, you're doing it wrong. So it's going to set that up. It's going to set up Laravel. It's going to set up Livewire and Reverb. It's going to configure an env file with MariaDB credentials. I don't love an env file long term, but short term when we're in initial phase, that is good. WebSocket server within Lando, expose that port, mapping out a lando.yaml file. If you haven't used Lando before, it's pretty straightforward. You download it from its dev with Lando. You download it from dev with Lando and install it. Everything else is kept good. It's standing up a Docker container for me. Ignore some of these other ones. Okay, we're gonna delete those. Live demo. So it's going to set up my container, stand up Docker. But if you haven't used Lando before, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a containerized development platform. And they set a recipe inside of a lando.yaml file. So once you've established it, if you're going to be working with a team or you need somebody to support it and you hire somebody to work out of your GitHub repo, all they have to do is a Lando start. And from Lando start, it will build all of the pieces. It's all tied together in a nice library, and it'll stand it all up in Docker for you. And it's like a magic trick. If you're trying to do it yourself and you have to set up all of your pieces and you have to connect them all to Docker, it can be done. But man, that's a level of effort that I'd like to offload onto Lando. So it's creating a Lando local environment for a new Lando instance. It's going to make sure that everything's up to date. It's going to go in and look for a Laravel recipe with MariaDB. Let's see where it's at. So it's also working through all of its additional logic here. If it's planning. So as part of planning, it's going to figure out how it's going to structure this thing. It's going to line it out for me. And then when I'm ready, it will build. This is a critical step that people skip because they go, oh, well, I want it done right now. But when we're setting this plan together, it's evaluating the most effective way to handle it, and it's making sure that we're cool with that before it just suddenly goes. And especially if you give it access to things like your AWS instance, that is how you end up spending $1 million in build on tokens. When you just say you have access to everything, do everything you want to do. So it's going to continue to work. It's unraveling. But it's setting up MailPit as a test mail server. It's setting up all of the proxies.
Sometime later.
Okay, we've let Claude do its thing. It's been thinking for a while. So it looks like it's about ready to come up with a final plan. What it's going to do is first generate its output as a plan into the chat. That's not really enough for me to keep all of this together long term. So whatever it stands up, I'm also going to create a technical architecture plan document, maybe an ARC42. I'm not sure if I want to be that intensive. But based on this, we want to keep it somewhere. And it's nice and it's in Markdown right now. So us saying, hey, just drop this into another directory for reference and so that we can see what our changes are, just makes sense. But you can see Laravel, Livewire, Reverb, MariaDB. It's going to place this in my Bytes directory. It gives me all of the tech stack. Using Lando, no local PHP Composer node is required. Laravel 11, PHP 8.3, Maria 10.11, Redis 7, Livewire 3. It also, if you looked through all of the logic and you understand how some of this is put together, it already checks for compatibility and to see that all these bits actually play together. But the first piece of code that it's going to write me is a lando.yaml file. The lando.yaml file is going to have all of the technical bits. So it's going to run on a public web root. It's going to be a MariaDB data that's MySQL. It's going to be running on a Redis cache, xdebug off. We can turn that on when we develop. And then Lando npm run dev host blah blah blah. It's Vite. That's fine. Reverb with WebSockets is fine. Mailpit for testing mail. It's going to include these tools. So in Lando, it's all containerized, right? With the tools, these are going to be available underneath Lando. So when you're executing a command, you can do Lando PHP, for example, and it would allow PHP to run in your terminal. It's not something that you have to install them locally because you're using this system. It looks like we're going to be setting up Vite. Reverb start will start our WebSockets. Q work will start our Redis. Maria, Redis, CLI pint. Okay, I'm fine with that. It also gives us the commands. So like I said, Lando start, everything's inside that Lando container. npm is inside Lando. Composer is inside Lando. That is all acceptable. It's setting up in .env, which long-term we don't want that in the code base. We probably want that to be hosted in AWS Secret Keeper or in our GitHub secrets potentially that we can then pull locally and run. But to start, that makes sense. Fix reverb PHP for internal routing. That sounds fine. So it's Lando has its own routing that it builds on the Lando start. This is what would happen after that. Web app. So this will be my local development URL. It'll have a built-in server, and all of these will have, it'll all be built into Docker containers. And usually they each have a Docker container. Actually, when you look at the recipe in the lando.yaml, it'll have each of these will be its own piece. App server will be a Docker container. Database will be a Docker container. Cache will be a container. Verification after our states and critical files. env file, reverb, it's okay. So that is where we're going to start. It's gone through the plan. It iterated with me for the plan. I want to move ahead, but before I do that, can we place an overview, a .md of this in our docs and architecture, if I can spell. I want to track our decision making process for potential future ARC42 type docs. Okay, so it will I don't think that's changed. This is what's new. Before any other work, write a copy of this plan to streetbytes lando setup.md file under docs and architecture. So the decision-making process is captured for future ARC42 documentation. Yes, and auto accept. Now it will build. So you can see it's outside of plan. Allow this bash command. I like making it prompt me, but because we're going to do this in a more time efficient manner, you can also give it a yes, allow for this project. So that'll let it do all the bits for me. It's going to start implementing. So the first thing it's going to do is set up a .claude. This is where It keeps its own context. Eventually, we will have a Claude.md file, which it can use as a point of reference for how this system is built. It keeps the context isolated. Instead of it having to look through every file as we're building all of this, it could reference one file, which will save it a lot of tokens. And this first step is probably pretty token extensive. I'm hoping, because we went through plan first, that should save us a lot of it digging through itself. When you get expensive is when you don't have that context and it just continues to dig through its own thing over and over and over. So this is my markdown for future Arc42. It did that first. It looks like, yes, allow access to dark architecture for this session. So if I want to open in a new window, I could keep them under one. I could open that from desktop, but that feels a little bit dirty. For my development, I like having things pretty compartmentalized. But my docs and architecture will have that MD, and if you want to preview it, I just have to find the button. Ideally, we would keep that in Markdown, and we can actually open it from a browser, or we can host it on GitHub, and maybe alongside or even inside the same repo to give us more context. But there's a preview button up here, if I can remember which one. Yeah, there we go. And this will be the structure that it uses going forward in our documenting. So, and documentation saves lives. I know it feels like it's a waste of time. It's really not. If you want to know why a decision was made, especially if you're working with a client, and the client says, we need this requirement met, and that requirement requires changing other things that you've set up into your infrastructure. Having that documentation saying, this is why it was made. Having a change doc where you say, this change was made on this day and this is why, is very important. Don't skip it. Promise. Okay? Don't skip it. Now, both files are in place. Lando.yaml is set. The MD file is set. Now we're going to do our initial Lando build steps. And if you want, you can have it do it for you. But because I like having that manual granular control, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So Lando start, if you downloaded and installed Lando, should just stand up the container. And if they've mapped everything right, you should start seeing those containers drop in your Docker. So Street Bytes, there's the Lando proxy hype is the general, but Street Bytes is my new Docker container, and it has the nested. So there's a node container, there's a mail container, there's dev with Lando, which is their base container, and you can see it build itself in real time. Also, if you are looking at logs and you're having an issue with something like the app server, there's some error flagging on PHP, you could get in here and look at the app server, and it would actually get you that context if you don't want to have to use some custom logging tooling. So it's stood up, which is a great start. We've got our node local, reverb local, are all standing up. Mail bit is there. We have streetbytes.lando.site. Let's just open it. Here we are. When it's all stood up, we should see something here. But right now, it's still in progress. And we have to do Composer. That's part of the dev lifecycle. Looks like I still need to do Composer before it stands the rest of those up. So let's do a Composer, Livewire, Laravel. App is not empty. Yeah, it is. I don't even have an app. Okay, new folder, .app. just app. It's just app. Create project command 394 per directory. App is not empty. Okay. So let's exit this context. So when it comes to our conversations with Claude, we don't want it to be all together. I don't need it to start hallucinating and freaking out. So whenever I'm dealing with a new problem, you can always create a new one. You can also see the old ones. So my setup is here, but I'm going to be dealing with a new issue. So I'm going to start a new prompt. I'm running into this error in my Laravel build process on Lando. Let's just copy this whole thing. And I have found this is the most useful way to work with Claude, is give it an obvious issue and let it come up with an obvious answer. So clear the directory, LSLA, resolve everything, ignore platform requirements, create a subdirectory, move files. I'm not going to do option 2 or option 3. Let's do a LSLA. I don't see anything. Remove everything and retry. I mean, sure. We could do that. We'd remove our lando.yaml file. Let's make a copy. I like to trust but verify. So I've copied, ooh, wrong button. I like to trust but verify. So let's go ahead and execute its option command. If you like, you can use a copy quick button here. Paste. Okay, let's try one more time. It should be much quicker the second go around because of that. So I can go to my context here and I can go back to my steps. Okay, so it's gone through its new build. Let's try Composer again. That did not fix, so we'll go back. Option 1, clear, didn't work. Ignore platform requirements with a force flag. Composer doesn't have force. For create project. Clearing the most reliable path. So the good news is option 3 looks like it worked. What I'll do is I will move it out of temp and into root. And then we'll just try a composer again just to make sure that everything... Okay. So let's take it out of temp. There's a more efficient way to do this, but I'm recording, so we're not going to do that. Okay, temp is gone. Let's just try another composer. Lando Composer install. And because I'm in the Lando container, okay, good, it did work. So they're all working and there's no further issues. So that was my workaround. Let's scrap some of those and come back to here. Then I want to set up my keygen. Application set. Apply Redis reverb male values from the plan. All values are in the architecture doc. So in our env, we have all of these. Okay, so here's my architecture doc. From here, and you can set your browser to open this in a nicer way, but I'm trying to get through this and end this video because it's already long enough. Composer, here we are. So it needs to be side by side. I'm going to drag this over to my other screen just for ease of work. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to copy the whole damn thing, pardon my French, and see if it works. Okay, then I've got install Livewire. And it's going to do composer require, and that's going to add it to my composers.json and composer.lock file, which is what we want. I'm going to do a Lando publish using the artisan service. It is published. Install reverb. And I want Laravel reverb. Yes. And that's going to install that. I'm going to load and run my... It's going to build the dependencies into NPM. I'm going to load and run my NPM install. So that is run, and then I'm going to do a Atlassian migrate. It's not really in production, so it doesn't matter. After install broadcasting, you may need to patch the host option in the config so that PHP server reaches reverb bytes docker. Let me know when Lando start finishes. Yeah, I think I've run through all those steps. Can you double check me? Give some scrutiny to the .env file. So while it's doing that, the other piece of this that's important, so everything should have a README all the time, of course. But on top of a README, we're using AI, and AI is not going to need all the context that some dev like you or I are going to need. So when we're doing this work, we need to try to keep it in context so that the next time we have to run, it's not going to go through all of the code base. It's going to be more efficient and effective than our token use. So once we get this stood up and working, which should happen soon, I hope. Let's try it one more time just to see where we're at. Lando. There we go. Yeah, it's still making things work. When that stood up effectively, then we want it to document itself and give it a Claude.md file because I'm using Claude. Hub would use a Copilot instructions.md file, but we want to give it that context so that the next time that it has to look at this, it knows, okay, this is your database, this is your setup, this is how all the pieces are played together. And the best way to do that is to tell it to do it for you. Bash command, open SSL, it's okay. Yeah, so it's going to open an SSL port and generate reverb. Okay. So if we go back to its logic, it's doing some looking to see if anything's broke. Part of the upside of us doing the initial instead of having it do it is just the token cost. If we have to have it execute every single command, those all cost. Several issues in env. Fixing those now. Okay, that's good. Generate the app key. Ah, that explains my 500. Defaults to production-like behavior, which we don't want. Okay. So generate the app key for artisan. Add is there. Rebuild Vite. It is built, and Vite should be populated in our .env. Verify it boots. It did boot. It gives me a summary of changes and so now if I still have that window, Laravel did it. So we are at a point where our local build is running. It's in Lando. We have our URL is leading us to Laravel, which we haven't done any development or setting up the system. This is just architecture. So this is what you're expecting from this point. From here, we can start working with Claude to generate a look and feel, to generate our backend connections. But before we do that, let's go ahead and have it build a Claude.md file. Can you gather the context from this discussion? Only because this is the first thing that we've done so far. And add it to a Claude.md file in the root. I want to keep the context of the Claude.md file limited to things the agent will need to know. Do not add anything that is already known by the AI agents. That's very important. So I do Drupal development most of the time, right? In Drupal development, if you say, hey, look at this entire site and tell me all the context that you need to know, it's going to give a bunch of things that the AI already knows it. It's already in the model. Things like how does a module work? How does a system work? That's all there. So it's just adding more bloat and more processing to the agent that we don't need. So I want to going to run a Python script to dig through the code, which is fine. I'm going to allow that. I'm going to allow most of these things. If you're working on something that's in production, you should not allow that. But because this is new development and we're doing some semi-vibe code things, I think it's fine allowing it to do that. Claude MD created captures only non-obvious project-specific things an agent would get wrong without context. Tooling shortcuts, things like that. So now if I look at this, there we go. So this is going to be Claude's point of reference for everything. So it'll give me what do we need to do in general to start it. It'll give me what are the host names, what are the pieces. It'll give me all of the how is it split. The reverb host is set on top of the actual host instead of hosting from somewhere else. We want it to go through the cache, which is going to be reverb and Redis. So all of that's in here. What's our database name? What's our URLs? That way, when we have Claude execute something in the future, it doesn't have to guess. It knows this context. It's also useful to update the README, but personally, I intend to do a lot more development on this, and this isn't really at a state where I feel comfortable updating it. We can always adjust the readme.md later, but because that's not affecting our token usage, because it's not affecting our Claude context, we're going to leave that for a later video. Okay, well, I think that's enough for today. Thank you for sticking with me. I know I'm brand new at this, so feel free to critique in the comments. I'm going to have this out on YouTube. You guys can work with me through this. If you want to try something similar, or if you have other thoughts, or if you want to get back to me with what you're doing, what's your cool concept, I'd be happy to hear about it. There's no way that I'm going to be leaving my primary job to pursue something like this, but I'd be happy to give you some insight. If you love CMS, Drupal, or anything like that, that's really my expertise. I'd be happy to talk through that with you as well. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.